Morning again, Mike. We've had our cup of tea, and in our last sort of chat, we really concentrated mostly on a couple of productions you did at the Globe, Cymbeline and Midsummer Night's Dream. I think with a bit of Mongolia shoved into the middle of that, and also Israel, actually, a production in Israel of the singer. So we're moving on now. The millennium, the 21st century is well on its way. And where are you at now, Mike?
Well, then through an American contact from a long time ago, actually for contact which I met, a woman I met in Israel way back when I was living there. She was now teaching at Dartmouth College, which is one of those Ivy League, very posh colleges in New England, New Hampshire, and they invited me there to do a production of, and I did the Comedy of Errors, which is a play I've always liked a lot. I really enjoy it. I think it's beautifully structured, and tight and funny and crisp. And I had to work in the evenings because the students had classes all day, and it's not my favorite time. So I was hanging around there all morning and all afternoon, which was very nice. I mean, I have to say, they put me up in the most beautiful hotel. I can't remember. It was I wish I could remember the name of it again. It was so comfortable. It was kind of a small hotel, and they put chocolate on your bed, and I had a lovely desk and a view, and it was fantastic breakfasts, and it was just and also it had an underground sort of passage which took us right into the college. So it was incredibly, so I was very spoilt there, because it was an incredibly wealthy school. And they also gave me an office and a computer. Now, way back in 1980, I think it was, Nick Hearn, who I think then was working for Methuen, said, "Would you like to write a book about your work?" And I said, "Oh, yes, yeah, okay, thank you, yes." But I didn't have much time then. And also, I didn't have confidence. And I thought, who wants another book about playing objectives and actions? There's a million of them on my shelf, And I'd start, and then the writing was incredibly pompous. I've still got copies of it, sort of overwritten. And every so often I'd pursue it and give it, and then give it up. And then I think Nick, every 5 years or so, we'd re-meet and he'd re-stimulate me to start again. And suddenly, I don't know, I was sitting, hanging around in Dartmouth College with nothing to do. And I had a computer and I started writing the book. And I sort of got beyond that sort of point of no return with it and thought, right, now I'm on my way. So that became incredibly useful. And I think I wrote the first couple of chapters of it, meticulously. So that was how I filled my days. And then having rather nice meals locally and working with the actors in the evening. And they were a little tricky and, they weren't... I had done some workshop with some of them in London. They'd come to London for the summer, and I'd done a few odd workshops with them. And the training, it wasn't a thorough drama training. Do you know what I mean? It was a sort of in-between thing. But of course, because it was a very wealthy school, they had a very lovely theatre. They had a fantastic wardrobe department with everything in it you can imagine, for miles and miles, and everything labelled beautifully. You could go to things. I mean, it was spectacular. And they had a most wonderful designer who had worked for the Restovelli company in Georgia. he'd worked for Robert Sturmer, the guy that did the very famous Richard III and Caucasian Chalk Circle, you know. And for various reasons, I think because of, yes, I know why, because of corruption and so forth, and very degenerate politics, and because he was quite high profile, he was frightened his daughter might be kidnapped for ransom or something. And anyway, so he moved to New Hampshire, where he was obviously underemployed, you know, and so I had a wonderful relationship working with him and eating fabulous Georgian food that his wife cooked, unbelievably wonderful. And because he had lots of money, I wanted to create a sense of a city, you know, a sort of busy port for the play, yeah, and with lots of stalls and full of junk. So he went to the local. I think it's $1. I don't know. It's like the 5 and dime, where everything you buy is $1 or less, and we just loaded ourselves with jugs and glasses and plates and filled the stage. And I said more, you know. And it was, but they were surrounding the stage, but the actual acting area was a sort of open arena, and you had to run to get down into, because it was lower than the rest of the set. So there were sliding ramps that you had to run on and off to get onto the space and out again, which created a certain energy. And there were a couple of very talented actors there, including an Icelander, or at least he had an Icelandic name. And the show was wonderful. It really worked. And we were all surprised. The designer had become very cynical. He said, well, you know, they're not very, you know, you won't get much out of them. And even he had to admit they were all right. And it was, you know, it was a wonderful play because it's very short and it's crisp and it's funny. And there's, you know, and again, playing that comedy very seriously is great, because usually with the comedy of errors, it's an excuse for directors to show off. So they have awful concepts, you know, and there's clumsy gags and it's boring. This was very funny because there was a genuine sense of the characters believing they had gone mad because they didn't know where they were. You know, I thought I saw you 5 minutes ago. I think I'm going mad. You know, so it was funny and frightening at the same time. And again, it was one of those wonderful reunions at the end when all the families came together. So it was very nice. So I went away with a good taste in my mouth and lots of money, because I earned well there, feeling that was a very nice thing to do, yeah. I then got asked, I think, by Peter James, who my hero and benefactor and God knows what, who was still running LAMDA, if I would like to do one of their long, what they called long projects with their third-year students. At the end of the second year, you meet with them. You describe the work you're going to do. You give them research to do over the summer vacation. You come back and then you work on the play in 2 sort of tranches, you know, in 2 blocks. One, you just work 3 times a week or 4 times a week with them. Then there's a gap. And then you have a final time where you rehearse fully and then open. And I asked Philip if he'd like to do that with me, and he thought the Oklahoma City bombing would be very interesting. That had happened a few years before, and it was about this guy who'd been in the first, you know, Iran war, yeah, in early 2000, whatever it was, and became very he was a sort of hero. But he became very disillusioned and joined sort of those liberation parties and, you know, went to gun conferences and gun shows and things like that. And
you mean the Iraq War?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yes, the Iraq War. This the first Iraq War, yeah. And he decided to blow up a government building. And in that government building, whether he knew it or not, there was a nursery school. And he blew it up, and I think 168 people were killed, a lot of them being little kids. And I think he went to jail. Was he? electrocuted again? No, I just think he went to jail. But it was a very interesting story because it had so many ramifications. It had a lot to do. Do you remember there was, oh God, I'm forgetting the name of everything. There was a group in Texas, religious group, who had been under siege. They're very extreme. Oh God. And he was involved with that. He was very influenced by that. So there were a lot of ramifications into politics. So there was a lot to research. So, and also, while I'd been at Dartmouth College, I bought a couple of books about the Oklahoma City bombing. And one of them contained some information that was really interesting. When the disaster occurred, a whole bunch of therapists, psychotherapists and so forth, descended on Oklahoma City and set themselves up to take care of the people who were bereaved and so forth. And what they basically did, they sort of medicalized everybody. People who were obviously having, were grieving or were shocked, were experiencing that, and they turned them into sort of medical cases, which is, and I think that's happening a little bit now with, we're talking about mental health all the time, and people, when they're worried, they say, oh, I've got a lot of mental health. And you think, well, that's, certain painful emotions are part of being a human being. Grief, worry, and so forth. If it stops you from functioning, then it becomes ill. But if it's, anyway. And also, people who weren't involved in the disaster in any way invented situations, invented children who'd been killed, or pretended to be firemen who'd saved children. It was extraordinary, the repercussions. And I thought, let's not concentrate too much on the main story, on the main guy, but let's concentrate on all these collateral damage, what it did. I mean, for instance, there were all sorts of problems because the bombing went off and people died early, and then there were family disputes about property and inheritance. I mean, the ramifications were really fascinating, So, and I had a group of 18 actors at least. So they all had lots to do. They all created a character. They all took an aspect of that. They did a lot of research. Oh, it was the Waco bombings, that sort of thing in Texas. Was it the Dravidian something group? They were a religious group that the police were putting under siege. And that's right, that he got involved with. Anyway, okay. So they did a lot of research on penal punishment and being in prison and on terrorism. So it was very rich brew. And they were great, the actors. They came in and they created characters, and then we put the characters together into different combinations and created scenarios and stories. And I didn't know where we were going. I'd never done anything quite like this before. And Philip would get them to write down the scenes they'd improvised, and which he then sort of shaped. And I had no image of how the play was going to look. I just thought, I've got to trust my instinct. I don't know how I'm going to stage it. I can't see it. I just don't know at the moment. And on we went, and it was, it's something really interesting developed. And we did have the spine of the guy's story of coming back from the Iraq War on the plane, and a big announcement over the tannoy that we've got a hero of the war coming back, and him having to stand up while the plane was in flight and take some bows, and then becoming more and more disillusioned and not getting work, and being with his family, who were very conservative and correct and so forth. And so that was a sort of spine, and onto that we kept adding all these, people like a disillusioned priest, about a woman who fantasized about her child being killed in the bombing, and she used to go down to this fence where people put flowers on the site, and put her own things and grieve and have other people ask her about her child, you know. And it was, you know, there was a big range of characters. And we did it, and it was great. It was really lovely. It was a very good show, and everybody learned to sing Oklahoma. Because at the end, when they're trying to sort of comfort themselves that this all will pass, they ended up singing Oklahoma. And also there was a lot of infantilizing everybody, because, you know, this was happened with when Princess Diana was killed, that people put teddy bears outside Kensington Palace, and these things are no toys. And so finally, about a week, or well, probably a bit longer, before we opened, I suddenly had this idea that the stage should be full of rows of chairs. I'd got it from the airplane, I think, to start with. They were just going, and they wouldn't move the chairs, there'd just be rows and rows of chairs, so it would be a church. And afterwards, I realized that the actual memorial that was designed for these people was a series of chairs that had been with a lighting underneath that made them glow. And I don't know whether I knew that or saw that, but so that was the thing. And so on all the seats, there were teddy bears of different sizes. And at the end, when they were singing Oklahoma, they were all sort of waving teddy bears in the air. And because of the Iraq War, there was a woman with a dead child in her arms grieving, you know, an Iraqi woman. I don't know the connection. And it was a theme that went, and a lot of it was very funny. They were about, you know, therapists, you know, giving their patients sort of aggression treatment, you know, hit the pillow, punch the pillow, you know, hit the pillow really hard, no hard, you know, things like that. Anyway, no, it was a very nice experience, and I enjoyed doing it. And again, it was a very lovely collaboration between Philip and myself. He also wrote a scene in the middle. There were 4 terrorists, and it's not true, but he put them into the same prison. And they'd meet in a gym and they'd argue and discuss. So right in the middle of this, there was a whole discussion about different forms of terrorism, you know, really nice. And there was meant to be a production somewhere in Manchester, and again, it never happened. So it never had a second outing, but it was a very, very nice piece to do. And I was rather proud of that piece, you know.
So, where are we going next then?
We are going back to America because I was, because of Cymbeline, a couple of people have seen Cymbeline and asked me to do a production at Yale. Now, Yale, you know, it's one of the, again, a very high-class Ivy League theatre. It has a very good theatre where they do what are essentially professional productions, but all the technical stuff is done by the students, and they might have a few student actors in it. So I had to go to New York and audition people, which I did, and my same designer, Peter McIntosh, came out, and we slightly revised the set, but it had the same principle. And we had a long rehearsal period, again, wonderful conditions. We had a dramaturg who just provided all the information we wanted to know, a table full of DVDs of every play or, you know, film I wanted to look at. It was really amazingly serviced. I mean, and you asked for a piece of scenery, and the next day it was there, you know, because they had so much money. And it just, I mean, on the spot, it was great. And I think it was a good production. I never heard much about it. I never got sent any reviews. I had a very traumatic experience there because the man who was running the company at the time had been the stage manager at LAMDA when I was there, and was very enthusiastic and very welcoming and warm and encouraging and lovely. And during previews, he got very critical of one of the actors. And I sort of defended the actor. And one night, when I wasn't at my clearest, I was very defensive and I argued with him. And he said to me, I'm running this theatre. I say what gets done. And suddenly, this man who'd been so friendly turned into a sort of monster. It was like somebody I'd never seen before. And I was so shocked. I was shattered. I didn't know who I was talking to, you know, and I brooded on it. And insensibly, I thought, I'll apologize. So I sent him an email the next day saying, look, I'm sorry I overreacted. I do apologize. And he sent me one back. But there was a sort of severance of relationships. And I asked for things I never really heard from him. So I don't know if it did well or not. What was very nice about it was that James Ellroy, who had written the book Black Dahlia, came to see it, and he did a couple of classes, and I sat in on his classes. And okay, he's a thriller writer, but he talked like a real artist, which I felt a real creative person. You know, he talked about taking time, about doing the research, allowing the research to cook itself, to have a plan which you then can scrap, and then writing. And although the play seems to be full, of period, closely researched language, a lot of it is invented. I mean, and I felt that in the work. He's incredibly witty, and it was lovely. And I met him, and he was very nice about the show. He said it was a much better adaptation than the adaptation of LA Confidential, another of his books that was made into a movie, because I hadn't been politically correct. I kept all those terms about black people that were not meant to say anymore, that were in the book, in it, and was very specific about all those prejudicial, those very violent cops. Yeah, because the book, as I've said before, is about observing a history of America from the underbelly, which is from the crime and the police and so forth. And anyway, it was nice to be there. So I was left in a bit of a limbo by it. It did its stint, and I never had any more relationship with the place. Wow. It was occasionally I'd get a request. Somebody to see could they see a copy of the script? So I'd say yes, but nothing came of that.
We're going to bring this section to a close, Mike. Okay. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.